with you. You think you're flawed, but wouldn't you agree? You're perfect for me.
So when we started talking about doing these videos, this series on autism and Nathan's diagnosis and what it was like, one of the things that I really wanted to address was the diagnosis process. And that's because when we started it, we had absolutely no idea what to expect. We didn't understand, I don't think, how many doctors we would see, how many professionals we would see, how many times we would need it diagnosed, how important it was to carry that diagnosis with us almost everywhere so that people understood and that we could continue to get help. Now, I will say that it's a lot more complicated than a standard diagnosis because you're not just going to be walking into your family doctor and saying, hey, I think my kid has autism, can you diagnose this? He takes a couple of minutes to talk to them, check them over, and comes back with a diagnosis of, it's autism or it's not. Back in 2012, it would have been the summer of 2012, or entering into the summer of 2012, Nathan started getting sent home a lot from his preschool. Well, Nathan started getting sent home a lot from his daycare, which would later turn into his preschool, same school. And the reason was it was because of his behavior. He was having what a lot of people would call a hissy fit, only times 10, and he was having them all day long. Later, we would learn that that's a meltdown, and that it's pretty standard fare for individuals with autism. That summer, I was called a lot. I worked. It took me about an hour to get to work. By the time I would get to work, sometimes there would be a message waiting for me that I needed to come pick up Nathan, and that sometimes he would only go to school for a day. Sometimes I would get called every single day to come pick Nathan up from school early because they felt ill-equipped to deal with it. I ended up meeting with the director of the daycare, the head teacher of his current class, his current daycare class, and the head teacher of the preschool program, and we developed a behavior plan that we thought would work for him, and we instituted that. That ended up carrying him till, I'd say until September. So we went from June to September, June, July, August. So we tried for about 3 months with the behavior plan we had developed. And this behavior plan was also instituted at home. It was not just left at the daycare. In September, as a group, we decided that we needed to reach out and get more help. We ended up getting together with a behavioral therapist that worked with the school, and that behavioral therapist would come in once every week or once every 2 weeks for Nathan specifically, although he was in more often for other children that needed assistance in the class. It was that September that Nathan also started preschool, and Patrick started preschool as well. Patrick is a year younger, but Patrick has always been on grade level with Nathan or above. So Patrick started it too. So we really were seeing parallels between Patrick and Nathan, and really seeing where Nathan was having more difficulty. We worked with that behavioral therapist for 2 months. 2 months. Before he said that he didn't feel that the behavior plan we had instituted with him and under his care was sufficient. And he didn't feel like Nathan was making enough progress that all he needed to do was stay with him. So he suggested that we see a clinical social worker. Now, a clinical social worker is a mental health professional. They are allowed to offer counseling along with a lot of other services. And this one was absolutely wonderful. We walked in at our first appointment, and this was, I think our first appointment was in November. There was some wait. That first appointment probably took about an hour. And during that appointment, she did an evaluation. She talked to Nathan. She talked to us, his dad and I, about what we had experienced, what his problems were, what, his strengths were. And she said at the end of the appointment, she said, I don't want to scare you, but I do think that Nathan might be on the autism spectrum. It wasn't scary for us, although I do understand that it is intimidating for a lot of people to hear that diagnosis, because it is a big one. It's a big diagnosis. It is, this will be the rest of his life. There will be treatment for the rest of his life. Now, we went and saw this clinical social worker about 1 to 2 times a week for therapy with Nathan, and I'll probably discuss what those therapies were like in a different video. And in the meantime, she put in a referral for a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, well, actually a pediatric clinical psychologist, because she could not make the diagnosis, or was at least not comfortable making the diagnosis of autism. January of that year, we had our first appointment with the clinical psychologist. And I'd say almost immediately it was pretty clear that she could tell something was different about Nathan. Due diligence insists that, she'd take a while to determine her diagnosis. We met with her several more times over the course of a year. She ended up visiting the school. She offered to visit at home, although we were having far fewer problems at home than we ever had at school. I'm sure that's because he got a lot more one-on-one at home than he did at school. She saw several indications that Nathan did fall on the spectrum. In the meantime, we ended up sort of treating Nathan for autism, but not officially, because unfortunately you can't bill your insurance for something that you don't have a diagnosis for. Okay, that following August, Nathan started kindergarten at a public school. I met with teachers, I met with assistants, I met with these schools' autism team, or at least the county's autism team, to discuss, Nathan is under current evaluation for autism. We won't have a diagnosis until January. The psychologist will like to come and meet with you. And I will talk more about the IEP process in a follow-up video, in a subsequent video. The clinical psychologist ended up getting back to us. We ended up making a final appointment with her in January of that year. So about a year had passed since we began the diagnosis, the official diagnosis process. And once we had that diagnosis, we went in. Now, she did give Nathan an IQ test while we were there. Although we didn't get the results back after that, we do suspect he was probably average to above average intelligence. He's, and it's absolutely fine with us. With as much as he's dealing with, average is wonderful. So we went in the room after the clinical psychologist performed that super basic identification of shapes and sequences and things like that. It was for an IQ test. She sat us down and she said, yes, I did complete my evaluation. I do believe Nathan has autism. He would have autism spectrum disorder level 2. Now that means he would need substantial support, and we could then take that diagnosis and go seek out assistance. And after that, it just opened enormous amounts of doors. We were able to get help. We were able to have insurance pay for it. We were able to start going to a specialty center. So in our area, there's a hospital or an offshoot of our hospital that is especially for children with developmental disabilities, learning disabilities, physical disabilities, children with special needs. And we were actually able, after we got this diagnosis, to get involved with them. Now this is wonderful because it allowed us to see a developmental pediatrician. We were allowed to start with, we were able to start Nathan on some medication that has drastically helped his sensory sensitivities. And it really made life a lot easier, not just for us, but for Nathan. And that was really the goal, was to help him learn coping devices and learn how to live a life that allowed for his autism to make him different, but didn't interrupt his life to the point where he would have to stay out of school or avoid social situations. It was difficult, and it was a difficult diagnosis to have about your child. But I can honestly say, I'm glad we did it. I'm glad we did it early. I really can't say how grateful I am to the clinical social worker who first said, I think this is autism. It made a big difference in our lives. And autism has made a big difference in our lives. And it's really opened us up to a lot of different stuff. And I'll film a second video about my feelings on it and my feelings on, really just dealing with Nathan and having him as a child. So, thank you.